The world woke up to a royal tremor that rippled through every corner of the United Kingdom. A warning, not whispered behind palace walls, but spoken publicly by King Charles himself. And it wasn't just any statement. It was a declaration that could strip Prince Harry of the one thing that still tethered him to the monarchy, the title of Duke of Sussex. But the shock didn't stop there. Because in this royal twist that feels almost Shakespearean, the king didn't merely question Harry's right to the title. He allegedly identified someone else as its rightful heir, James Alexander Philip, the teenage son of Prince Edward. Pause for a second. Imagine that. A royal reshuffling that not only cuts Harry off, but places a young man, barely known to the public, in the spotlight of legitimacy. Why now? Why James? And why issue such a warning in front of the entire world instead of handling it quietly behind closed doors, as the royal family usually does? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The answer, as you'll soon discover, is tangled in decades of royal history, legal precedent, and bitter family wounds that never healed. What began as a quiet dispute over titles and respect has evolved into a full-blown power reckoning. A question not just of lineage, but of identity. Who truly deserves the title of Duke of Sussex? And more importantly, what does King Charles know that has the palace so on edge? The king's statement was precise, almost clinical, yet it carried an undertone of heartbreak. A father's exhaustion wrapped inside a monarch's authority. In the footage that circulated online within minutes, Charles's expression was not one of rage, but of disappointment. His eyes were tired, his tone deliberate. Titles, he said, carry responsibility, not convenience. That one line sent shockwaves through the royal ecosystem. Because to many, it wasn't simply a matter of responsibility. It was a matter of ownership. Was King Charles implying that Prince Harry had lost his moral right to the title? Or was he hinting that the title had never legally been his to claim in the first place? To understand the gravity of what this means, you have to look beyond the surface, beyond the tabloids, beyond the staged smiles. The Duke of Sussex title isn't just decorative. It carries lineage, legitimacy, and symbolic control. It defines a man's royal place. For centuries, titles like these have determined not just power, but history itself. The title, bestowed by Queen Elizabeth II on Harry in 2018, was meant to honor a new beginning, a fresh royal chapter as he embarked on marriage with Meghan Markle. It represented hope, continuity, and royal evolution. But today, that same title has become the center of one of the most shocking royal disputes in modern history. The public first noticed the tension when Buckingham Palace's official website underwent a quiet update. Eagle-eyed watchers saw subtle changes, mentions of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex being reordered, sometimes even temporarily removed. It was dismissed as a digital oversight at first, but royal analysts knew better. The palace never makes changes without meaning. And soon after, the king's cryptic statement confirmed everyone's suspicion. Something monumental was shifting behind the scenes. For King Charles to publicly address Prince Harry in this way was unprecedented. The monarchy thrives on silence, on discretion, on the illusion of unity. When Charles chose to speak out, it wasn't spontaneous, it was a warning. But what provoked him? Sources close to the palace whisper that Harry's continued commercial use of the title, through book deals, media appearances, and branding, had finally crossed an invisible line. In the king's view, it wasn't just distasteful. It was a violation. But there's a deeper layer here, one that very few are talking about. A layer tied to the royal bloodline itself. Because the king's warning didn't end with Harry. It included a reference to the rightful continuity of the Sussex name. Those words, carefully chosen, carried enormous implication. In royal language, continuity isn't about sentiment. It's about legal succession. It means there is another claimant. And that's where James Alexander Philip comes in. For years, James has lived in the quiet shadow of his father, Prince Edward, and mother, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. Polite, educated, soft-spoken, he's rarely made public appearances. The royal press barely mentions him, and when they do, it's with affection, the discreet royal. But behind that gentle image lies a surprising truth. Legally, James Alexander Philip is one of the few royals whose lineage gives him potential access to the very title Harry has been holding on to. Now, If you're wondering how a teenager could possibly be in line for a title already given to another prince, the answer lies buried in royal legal frameworks, centuries-old letters patent, and succession clauses that define inheritance rights under very specific conditions. It's complicated, archaic, and easily misunderstood until someone with authority decides to interpret it differently. Someone like King Charles. Royal historians claim there's precedent for this kind of shift. Titles, they say, can be reclaimed or reassigned under the crown's prerogative if the holder is deemed unfit or misaligned with royal duty. It's rare, but not impossible. The Duke of Cumberland lost his privileges in the 20th century under similar logic, though in that case, politics, not personal rebellion, were at play. So when King Charles issued his public warning, it wasn't merely emotional. It was constitutional. It was a signal that the crown itself, not just the man who wears it, was taking back control of a legacy. Still, beneath all this formality lies something more human. A father warning his son. A monarch reclaiming order. A family struggling to keep dignity alive while the world watches their cracks widen. But make no mistake, this was no ordinary warning. The king didn't just address Harry privately. He made it public, deliberate, and unmissable. Royal watchers called it an open rebuke. Insiders described it as a line in the sand. Even within palace walls, staff whispered that this was the king's final olive branch and his last strike. And if that's true, then the stage is set for one of the most explosive showdowns in royal history. Because here's where it gets darker. Behind the king's polished statement and Harry's stubborn silence lies a buried story, a family document, according to whispers, that predates even Queen Elizabeth's reign. A document that supposedly outlines the conditions under which the Duke of Sussex title could revert to a different bloodline if the current holder fails in his royal obligations. You can almost feel the irony, can't you? A title given in joy, now standing as the instrument of estrangement. For Harry, who built his public identity around that title even after abandoning his royal duties, this revelation strikes at the heart of his existence. Without it, he becomes just Harry. No longer Duke, no longer Sussex, just a man who once belonged to a world that's now locking him out. And yet, for James Alexander Philip, a boy barely stepping into adulthood, this moment marks something else entirely. A sudden inheritance of responsibility, symbolism, and controversy. He didn't ask for this. But if the king is right, he might be the only one legally entitled to it. So what happens now? Does Harry fight back, as he always does, through interviews, legal teams, and calculated defiance? Does he ignore the king's warning and continue using the title abroad, risking legal and diplomatic backlash? Or does he finally bow to pressure and surrender the last vestige of his royal self? And how will the world react if the crown formally recognizes James Alexander Philip as the rightful Duke of Sussex? What would that do to the royal hierarchy, to the fragile public image of a family already fractured by scandal, grief, and distrust? Because this isn't just a story about titles and names. It's about something deeper: legitimacy, blood, and belonging. The monarchy stands on those principles. Once they crack, everything else trembles. For King Charles, this decision isn't about revenge or power. Those who know him well say it's about legacy. He doesn't want to be remembered as the monarch who let the crown's integrity crumble under scandal. To him, protecting the institution means making difficult choices, even when those choices hurt his own flesh and blood. The British public, divided as always, can't decide whether to applaud his firmness or pity his sorrow. Some say he's restoring discipline. Others say he's losing his son. But whichever side you're on, one thing is clear. This moment marks a turning point in modern royal history. A monarch drawing boundaries against his own son. The silence from Montecito after the warning was deafening. For days, Harry and Meghan stayed out of sight. No official statement, no spokesperson response, just silence. But within that silence, sources say, was fury. Meghan allegedly viewed the warning as an act of humiliation, while Harry felt betrayed by what he called his father's public punishment. And still, amid all the noise and speculation, the king remained calm. The palace's official stance was brief, almost icy. His Majesty's statement stands. No elaboration, no denial, just quiet finality. Yet, Those close to the king insist that this is only the beginning, that the warning wasn't meant as an end, but as a door opening to something much larger. Because if the claims about James Alexander Philip's rightful inheritance are true, then this isn't just a warning. It's a transfer of legacy in motion. You can feel it building, the tension between law and love, tradition and rebellion, bloodline and behavior. The monarchy, as polished as it appears, has always been a delicate balancing act between symbolism and survival. But now, that balance is tipping. And as it does, one question hangs in the air. Will Harry fight to keep what the king says was never truly his? Or will he watch as a new, unexpected face quietly takes his place in royal history? Because in this family, power isn't handed down. It's earned, tested, and sometimes reclaimed. And for King Charles, the time to reclaim might have just begun. But what came next, behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, in hushed meetings and sealed letters, would change everything. Because buried beneath centuries of royal protocol lay one document, one signature, one truth that could upend the very foundation of who gets to call themselves Duke of Sussex. It began not with a whisper, but with a thunderclap, a royal statement broadcast to millions. A father's voice wrapped in regal formality, yet trembling beneath the weight of heartbreak. The title of Duke of Sussex, King Charles said in his carefully measured tone, is a position of duty, not advantage. That line froze the air across Britain. Duty, not advantage. To most, it sounded like a philosophical remark, the kind of royal rhetoric meant to fill airtime and avoid confrontation. But to those who understood royal language, every syllable, every pause, every subtle emphasis, it was a coded shot across the Atlantic. A message aimed squarely at Prince Harry. And the strangest part? The king didn't deny Harry's title outright. He didn't strip it publicly. He didn't shout or accuse. He did something worse. He made the world doubt that the title was ever truly his. Imagine the shock. The official broadcast aired mid-morning, just before the Prime Minister's weekly briefing, ensuring maximum audience and immediate press coverage. The camera panned across the king's face, pale yet composed. The public had seen him speak of global issues, charity causes, even wars abroad, but never like this. His eyes seemed focused somewhere beyond the lens, as if speaking not to the nation, but to his son. The room behind him was intentionally chosen. The green drawing room of Buckingham Palace, the same space where he had stood during his first address as monarch. But this time, the atmosphere felt colder, stripped of sentiment. Every visual detail, the framed portrait of Queen Elizabeth behind him, the symbolic golden desk, the letter embossed with the royal seal, hinted at continuity, heritage, and something else, judgment. For weeks leading up to the announcement, whispers had already begun circulating. Anonymous insiders spoke of a statement being prepared that would redefine royal titles in modern terms. No one expected it to target Harry directly, yet the tone, the precision, the deliberate phrasing left little doubt. While the monarchy evolves, the king said, it must remain anchored to responsibility, service, and truth. Titles may not be used as instruments of profit or misrepresentation. Profit, misrepresentation, two words that sliced through every defense Harry might have had. The audience watching from living rooms and phones around the world instantly recognized what the king was referring to. The book deals, the Netflix series, the lucrative speaking tours. And then, almost offhandedly, came the line that sent royal reporters into a frenzy. The continuity of the Sussex title lies within the integrity of its intended lineage. Lineage. Intended. Continuity. It was language straight from the royal charter playbook, and language that hinted at a successor, a rightful heir, someone else. The moment those words left the king's lips, the palace phones began ringing nonstop. News networks switched into breaking coverage. Analysts dissected the statement in real time, pausing every few seconds to interpret the deeper meaning behind each phrase. But here's where things became truly unsettling. King Charles didn't name Harry once. He didn't have to. The omission itself was louder than any direct accusation. It was as though, in that single address, the king had symbolically erased his son's name from the royal register. Imagine being Harry in that moment, watching from thousands of miles away in Montecito, California. The man who once walked behind his grandmother's coffin, now sitting in silence as his father delivered a global rebuke, one that questioned the very legitimacy of his royal standing. Did Harry know this was coming? Some sources say he did. Others claim the warning hit him like a cold gust of wind from across the Atlantic. What's undeniable is how calculated the timing was. Just days earlier, Harry had made headlines for using the Duke of Sussex title in promotional material for a new charity campaign launched through his media brand. The campaign, while well-meaning, appeared commercial in tone, and that, apparently, was the final straw. Royal aides had allegedly pleaded with him privately for weeks to tone down the usage, warning that the king was deeply uncomfortable. Harry reportedly brushed it off. He believed, perhaps rightly, that his title was his to keep. After all, it was granted to him by his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, in 2018, a gift sealed in royal ceremony, witnessed by the world. But behind palace walls, another narrative had taken shape. The king, according to insiders, believed that Harry's repeated use of the title in commercial settings blurred the line between monarchy and celebrity. And worse, it risked making the royal family look like a brand up for sale. So when the king finally spoke, his words carried not only the authority of a monarch, but the disappointment of a father who felt betrayed. The public's reaction was electric. Within hours, social media was ablaze with debate. Some users praised the king's restraint, calling it a masterclass in dignified firmness. Others accused him of cruelty, of humiliating his son in front of the world. Yet what united everyone, supporters and critics alike, was disbelief. Never in modern royal history had a reigning monarch publicly warned his own son in this manner. But there was something else hidden in that speech that most people missed on the first listen, a subtle clue embedded in the king's phrasing that seemed to suggest the title's future had already been decided. When Charles said, "The continuity of the Sussex title lies within its intended lineage," he wasn't speaking hypothetically. Those who know royal terminology recognize that intended lineage refers not to current holders, but to heirs apparent under alternative legal interpretation. In simpler terms, that could mean one thing. Someone else in the family had a more legitimate claim to the Sussex title under old royal succession guidelines. And that's where speculation exploded. Within hours, royal historians began tracing the Sussex title's legal path, its origin, its precedent, its stipulations under letters patent. What they found astonished even them. The original creation of the title in the 1800s contained a clause that allowed reversion to the main royal bloodline if a title holder's line was extinguished or deemed diverted from royal service. Extinguished, diverted, two terms now echoing with new meaning. Could King Charles be invoking this forgotten clause? Could he be preparing to redirect the Sussex title not to Harry's offspring, but to another royal entirely, one more aligned with duty and service? The answer seemed to take shape as the day unfolded. Multiple royal correspondents noted an unusual pattern in the king's public appearances. In the week following the warning, he was seen spending increased time with Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, and, notably, with Edward's teenage son, James Alexander Philip. The tabloids caught photos of them at Windsor, casually walking near the gardens. Nothing unusual at first glance, until you noticed that the king was carrying a folder embossed with the royal seal, and Edward's son, James, was by his side. Why bring a young royal, barely 18, into such formal company? Why days after a statement about intended lineage? Royal watchers smelled the beginning of something seismic. And then came the whispers that the king had quietly convened a meeting at Balmoral prior to the speech. That in that meeting, the discussion had not only centered around Harry, but also around the title's rightful path. Some say the king expressed regret for how titles were assigned in haste during the turbulent post-Meghan engagement period. Others insist he revealed something more, that there existed documentation predating Queen Elizabeth's decision, suggesting the Sussex title was originally earmarked for another branch of the family altogether. At first, this sounded like conspiracy theory, but as the hours passed, patterns began to emerge. Every royal journalist with inside sources confirmed that the king's tone during that broadcast was not spontaneous. It was deliberate, planned, and legally vetted. Which means this wasn't a scolding. It was a formal notice. For Harry, it meant one thing: the walls were closing in. His silence in the aftermath spoke volumes. No interviews, no posts, not even a denial through official channels. Meghan, usually quick to respond to controversy, was reportedly furious. A source close to the couple told one outlet, "They feel blindsided. They think the king is trying to erase them." Erase. That word again. The same fear Harry once voiced when he left the royal family, that he and his children would be erased from history. Now, it seemed his prophecy might be coming true. Yet what the public didn't know then was that this royal warning wasn't the full story. It was just the opening act. The king's address was carefully timed to prepare the world for what was about to follow. The release of historical documents that could rewrite the legal standing of the Sussex title altogether. Those documents, sealed for generations, were rumored to have been uncovered during a recent review of the royal archives at Windsor Castle. Palace aides had been combing through family records for the coronation anniversary, ensuring everything was in order for the king's legacy timeline. And that's when, allegedly, they found it. A forgotten record, signed long ago, detailing the original succession line of the Sussex title and its intended reversion clause. When the king saw it, insiders say, his demeanor changed. He became quiet, withdrawn, almost haunted. The discovery confirmed what few dared to imagine, that the title granted to Harry in 2018 might not have been his to receive in perpetuity, that the rightful continuation of the Sussex line, by ancient rule, might belong elsewhere. To the untrained eye, this all sounds like ceremonial politics. But for the monarchy, lineage is law. And once a title's rightful path is proven, no amount of public sentiment can undo it. So as the king delivered that calm yet devastating warning, he wasn't merely protecting the monarchy from scandal. He was laying legal groundwork. A monarch's words, once spoken publicly, become precedent. And with that precedent, the path was cleared for reassignment. And that's why those final seconds of the address felt so eerie. The king paused, adjusted his glasses, and said softly, "May those who carry royal honor do so with clarity of heart." It sounded poetic, but to royal insiders, it was chilling. Clarity of heart, a direct reference, they say, to the oath required of any newly appointed duke under royal warrant. As the screen faded to the palace insignia, Britain collectively exhaled. The silence that followed was deafening. Reporters flooded Buckingham Palace gates, demanding clarification. None came. Instead, later that night, one senior palace aide was spotted leaving the royal offices carrying a sealed envelope, the same type used for official notices sent to royal family members abroad. Its destination? Montecito. What happened next would push this quiet family feud into full-blown royal warfare. Because inside that envelope, according to multiple sources, was not a letter of reconciliation, but a warning far more personal than anything the public had heard. And once Harry opened it, everything changed. But before the world could see his response, something unexpected happened inside Balmoral. A revelation that shifted the power dynamic yet again. A name was spoken in that room that froze even the king himself. James Alexander Philip. What does it really mean to be the Duke of Sussex? A question that sounds simple on the surface. Yet behind it lies centuries of history, power, and royal politics so intricate that even scholars struggle to untangle it. Because within the walls of the British monarchy, titles are not merely decorative flourishes. They are identity, hierarchy, and law woven into one. And when King Charles stood before the world and spoke those carefully measured words, the continuity of the Sussex title lies within its intended lineage. He wasn't just hinting at family disappointment. He was invoking history itself. Let's pull the curtain back. The Duke of Sussex title wasn't invented for Prince Harry. It has a past that most have forgotten, buried in dusty royal archives and old letters patent that read like a cross between poetry and courtroom decree. The title was first created in 1801 by King George III for his ninth son, Prince Augustus Frederick. A prince who, like Harry, was known for rebellion, controversy, and defiance of royal convention. See the irony yet? The very first Duke of Sussex was a royal outcast, loved by the public, distrusted by the palace. Prince Augustus fought against slavery, clashed with Parliament, and even defied royal marriage laws by wedding a woman without the king's consent. That illegal marriage rendered his children illegitimate in the eyes of royal law, ensuring that when he died, the title died with him. For nearly 2 centuries, the title lay dormant, unclaimed, untouched, like a relic waiting for a worthy heir. Then, in 2018, Queen Elizabeth II revived it for her grandson, Prince Harry, on the day of his wedding to Meghan Markle. A symbolic gesture, a gift of renewal. The Sussex name, once tarnished by rebellion, was now meant to represent progress, a modern royal couple stepping into a new era. But what the world didn't know was that the reactivation of that title came with silent conditions, legal and moral alike. The letters patent, the formal document that bestowed the dukedom, stated that the title would follow the male heirs of the body lawfully begotten. That phrase, though ancient in tone, carries immense legal weight. It means that if ever there is a question about lawful succession or legitimacy, the title can be paused, reassessed, or even revoked. Now imagine the situation today. Harry, no longer performing royal duties, living abroad, and facing a monarchy that sees him as detached from the crown's mission. What happens when the king determines that lawful duty has been abandoned? Could the very foundation of the title be called into question? That's precisely what's happening now. Because the king's recent warning didn't come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of years of unease about how the Sussex name had been used, not for duty, but for branding. When Harry and Meghan left the royal fold, they didn't renounce their titles, despite abandoning their working roles. Instead, they leaned into them, Duke and Duchess, using the monikers as powerful identifiers in public and business ventures. To the public, it looked harmless. To the monarchy, it looked dangerous. Imagine centuries of royal structure being reduced to hashtags, media contracts, and podcast slogans. To the crown, titles are sacred instruments of national identity, not commercial logos. That's why King Charles's statement carried such sting. He wasn't just angry. He was protecting an ancient system from being commodified. And yet, the irony is almost unbearable. The original Duke of Sussex, back in 1801, was accused of doing the same, defying royal expectation and paying the price. History, it seems, had repeated itself. But here's where it gets stranger. In those same letters patent that Queen Elizabeth signed in 2018, there exists a small clause, one often overlooked by journalists but quietly discussed among royal legal experts. It specifies that the title's continuation must align with Her Majesty's intent and the principles of service upheld by successors. That phrase, principles of service, is vague but powerful. It means that if a title holder's actions are deemed inconsistent with royal service, the monarch can step in and modify the line of inheritance. So when King Charles spoke of intended lineage, that wasn't poetic language. It was legal language, a coded signal to the public that the crown might soon exercise its prerogative to reassign the Sussex title altogether. But to whom? That's where James Alexander Philip enters this labyrinth of royal history. To understand why the king might view James as the rightful continuation of the Sussex line, we need to look at royal bloodlines through the prism of duty, not age or fame. James, the son of Prince Edward and Sophie, is one of the few young royals who has never courted controversy. He attends engagements quietly, represents the family at local events, and has been raised with the discipline Queen Elizabeth once described as duty without noise. And here's the fascinating part. Because of the way royal lineage flows through male descent, and due to the reactivation wording of the Sussex title, James sits in a legal gray area. He isn't next in line by normal succession, but under certain royal laws, particularly the ones governing dormant titles. He could be considered eligible for reassignment should the reigning monarch deem the current holder's line diverted from royal service. Diverted. That's the very term King Charles echoed in his address. It's as if every word of his speech was chosen to remind the world that he knows his history, and that, legally, he has the right to enforce it. Think of it this way. When a monarch reclaims a title, it's not just about punishment. It's about restoration. The king isn't merely removing something from Harry. He's recentering it within the framework of the monarchy's mission. The Sussex name has deep roots tied to advocacy, public service, and moral reform, principles that the king believes Harry has traded for celebrity. Still, one can't help but wonder, why now? Why make this move when the family's image is already fragile, and when every public action is dissected under the global microscope? The answer might lie in the king's understanding of timing. This isn't just about discipline. It's about succession planning. King Charles knows his reign won't last forever. Every decision he makes now shapes the monarchy his heirs will inherit. And by setting the tone through this warning, he's creating a precedent for how future royals should conduct themselves. In other words, this isn't about Harry alone. It's about drawing a line between monarchy and celebrity for generations to come. But behind the grandeur of royal policy lies something more personal, something far more painful. This warning, at its core, is the story of a father and son torn apart by ideals. One man born to rule, the other born to rebel. And perhaps that's what makes it so compelling. Because if you strip away the crowns and the castles, this is the same conflict families everywhere face: tradition versus freedom, duty versus desire. Only here, the stakes are national. Imagine the late Queen's sorrow if she could see this now. The title she gave in hope, now used as a weapon between her son and grandson. Those who worked closely with her say she believed Harry could modernize the monarchy from within. But instead, his departure fractured it from the outside. And what's truly tragic is that the public still remembers that 2018 wedding. The joy, the flags, the promise of unity. Yet within 7 years, that promise has turned into accusation. To understand why the title matters so much, picture what it symbolizes: power, legitimacy, continuity. Every duke's name becomes a chapter in the royal chronicle. And for King Charles, every chapter must serve the story of duty. When one doesn't, it threatens the entire book. But here's where the contradiction becomes unbearable. The king's move to reclaim the Sussex title in the name of royal integrity has also exposed just how fragile that integrity can be. By reminding the world that he can strip or redirect titles at will, he's reminding everyone that royal identity isn't inherited, it's bestowed, and it can be taken away. In a single address, the king managed to both preserve and destabilize the monarchy. And the question hanging over every newspaper, every broadcast since that day is this: what happens if Harry refuses to comply? Because history offers one unsettling clue. When the first Duke of Sussex defied the crown, his title died with him. No heirs, no continuation. The crown simply let it vanish. And yet now, rather than letting history repeat itself, Charles seems determined to redirect it. To hand it to someone who will embody the royal values he cherishes. James Alexander Philip represents that possibility. Quiet loyalty over rebellion. Tradition over tension. Service over scandal. But can a teenager carry the weight of a title drenched in controversy? Can he bear the burden of becoming the living symbol of his cousin's downfall? That's what makes this moment so volatile. Because this isn't just a legal transition. It's an emotional inheritance. If the king truly transfers the title, it sends a message to every royal. That behavior, not birthright, determines honor. And perhaps that's the new monarchy Charles envisions. One where titles aren't privileges of blood, but rewards of conduct. But let's be honest, Harry won't accept this quietly. Not after years of feeling sidelined, betrayed, and misunderstood. Insiders already report that he's been in contact with his legal advisors, exploring what he calls constitutional overreach. Yet even if he fights, what ground does he stand on? The monarchy isn't a democracy. It's an institution ruled by sovereign discretion. And if the king's decision truly rests on documented precedent, Harry may find himself cornered not by politics, but by history itself. Still, there's a question no one dares to ask aloud. What if this warning isn't just about legal power, but about legacy repair? What if the king is trying to protect not just the monarchy's image, but his own? After all, Charles's reign began under scrutiny. The shadow of Diana. The skepticism over Camilla. The public's demand for transparency. Every step he takes now defines how history will remember him. And perhaps, in his mind, reclaiming the Sussex name is a symbolic act of cleansing, restoring order where chaos once reigned. And yet, there's something haunting about the idea of a father reclaiming a gift he once celebrated. Of love turned into legal warfare. Of legacy tangled in personal pain. When the king delivered that warning, he wasn't just invoking law. He was rewriting emotion into policy. He was saying, in essence, that duty comes before affection. And maybe, to him, that's what makes a king. But as we look deeper into the days that followed, another layer unfolds, one hidden from public view. Because even as the media analyzed the meaning of the speech, inside Buckingham Palace, A small team of royal lawyers and historians was already at work. They weren't discussing Harry's feelings. They were studying paperwork, old royal seals, signatures, lineage clauses, and what they found next would make the king's words sound less like warning and more like prophecy. Because buried deep within the royal archives, under layers of dust and parchment, they discovered a document, one that hadn't been seen in over a century. And that document, according to insiders, contained a clause that could prove everything the king implied. It started with a whisper inside the royal archives, a room most people will never see, sealed beneath the north wing of Windsor Castle, where the air smells of parchment, dust, and history. This was where generations of royal secrets slept undisturbed, until one late afternoon, a team of archivists stumbled across something that would shake the foundations of the monarchy. A document, sealed with wax so old it had darkened to burgundy, and stamped with the insignia of King George III. They hadn't been looking for it. In fact, they were cataloging correspondence related to royal land holdings when the folder appeared, misfiled, misdated, or perhaps intentionally buried. Inside, they found letters and decrees connected to the first Duke of Sussex, Prince Augustus Frederick. At first, it seemed routine, property lists, ceremonial notes, genealogical details. But one page stood out, its ink darker, its words deliberate. It was titled, "On the Reversion of the Dukedom of Sussex in the Event of Lineal Extinction or Diversion." Reversion, extinction, diversion. Those three words turned the air cold. The archivist on duty reportedly froze, realizing what they had just uncovered wasn't a mere historical footnote. It was the original royal clause defining how the Duke of Sussex title could revert to the crown and, under certain circumstances, be reassigned to an alternative branch of the royal bloodline. A clause that had been dormant for more than 2 centuries. When the document was shown to senior officials, the effect was immediate. Within hours, the discovery was reported to Buckingham Palace. Within a day, the king had personally requested to review it. The paper was transported under guard from Windsor to the palace, encased in archival glass, its edges frayed but its meaning unmistakable. The clause was written in the flowery legal language of the 1800s, but modern translators confirmed its intent. If the title holder's direct issue failed to uphold royal service or allegiance, the title could be recalled to the sovereign's discretion and, upon review, transferred to the nearest lawful male line of unblemished loyalty. Nearest lawful male line. Unblemished loyalty. Those phrases were like thunder in the royal corridors. They were old, archaic, and yet chillingly relevant to the present moment. Because in today's royal landscape, only one young man fit that description, James Alexander Philip, the teenage son of Prince Edward. The discovery meant that King Charles wasn't just speaking metaphorically when he mentioned intended lineage. He was, in fact, referring to a documented, legal path that existed in royal precedent. The reversion clause made it possible, under certain interpretations, to reassign the Sussex title if the current Duke, Prince Harry, was deemed to have diverted from royal service. And who could argue that he hadn't? Since his departure from royal duties, Harry's life had become a public drama. Books, interviews, documentaries. Each one peeling back layers of royal secrecy, each one further alienating him from the family he once represented. His critics called him a traitor. His supporters called him brave. But to the monarchy, bravery had little to do with it. What mattered was allegiance. That's what made the document so powerful. It wasn't just an ancient clause. It was a legal weapon, sharpened by history and now unsheathed by circumstance. Imagine King Charles's face as he read it. The parchment spread across his desk, his reading glasses perched low, his fingers tracing the seal his ancestor had pressed into the wax over 2 centuries earlier. The king's aides reportedly said he read it twice, silently, then looked up and murmured. So it was never truly his, was it? No one dared to answer. From that moment, the king's next moves began to take shape. The public warning to Harry had already been issued, but now he had something even more powerful, documentation to justify it. What had begun as a father's plea was becoming a monarch's decree. Within the palace, legal teams were summoned. The Lord Chamberlain, the keeper of the privy purse, and the crown's legal advisor, all met behind closed doors. They pored over the text, debated its interpretation, and cross-referenced it with Queen Elizabeth II's 2018 letters patent that had officially granted Harry the title. Could a monarch's decree from 1801 override a modern patent? The answer wasn't simple, but the precedent, they agreed, was there. And that precedent scared everyone. Because if the king moved forward with invoking it, it wouldn't just affect Harry. It would set a legal example for every royal title moving forward. It would mean that no title, not even one granted by the late queen, was untouchable. The palace was split. Some aides urged restraint, warning that such a move would be seen as vindictive. Others argued that the monarchy's credibility was on the line. If a royal title is used for profit, one advisor reportedly told the king, it ceases to be a symbol of service. It becomes a brand, and the crown cannot be a brand. Meanwhile, the press got wind of the discovery. The Times ran a front-page story titled, "Hidden Clause Found in Royal Archives Could Reclaim Duke of Sussex Title." The Daily Mail called it the loophole that could end Harry's royal claim. Within hours, the public conversation shifted from speculation to expectation. Would King Charles actually use the document to strip his son of his title? Social media erupted. Some accused the king of revenge. Others said he was finally doing what Queen Elizabeth had been too patient to do. Yet few realized that for Charles, this wasn't about punishment. It was about correction. In his mind, the monarchy was like a machine, precise, delicate, and sacred. And once one cog starts spinning out of place, it can't be ignored. It must be realigned. But there's something deeply unsettling about all this, isn't there? The idea that a centuries-old piece of parchment could determine the identity of a man living in the 21st century. That a royal title, given in love, could be taken away by law. It blurs the line between heritage and humanity. As this discovery rippled through royal circles, one more detail emerged that no one had anticipated: a handwritten note attached to the document. It wasn't part of the legal text, but it bore a signature that made everyone pause. Queen Victoria. In delicate cursive, she had written, "Let no title be borne by one who forsakes the service of the crown." That annotation, though unofficial, carried immense symbolic weight. Queen Victoria's words were gospel in royal tradition. To ignore them would be to defy the spirit of the monarchy itself. So now, King Charles found himself armed not only with law but with legacy. Every move he made could be justified by both. The king's advisors reportedly prepared two separate drafts. One, a private letter to Harry urging voluntary relinquishment of the title. The other, a formal royal decree that could legally initiate the reversion process. But before the king could sign anything, something unexpected happened. The document's rediscovery leaked beyond the palace and reached Harry's team in California. The response was immediate and furious. A close friend of Harry reportedly told a journalist, "This is war. If they go through with it, Harry will fight back, not just in court, but in the public arena." War, a word the royal family dreads. Because this time, it wouldn't be fought with swords or armies, but with information, with documents, letters, interviews, and media influence. And both sides had plenty of ammunition. For Harry, losing the title wasn't just about prestige, it was about identity. The Duke of Sussex had become part of his personal brand, his projects, his legacy with Meghan. Removing it would sever him from everything royal that remained attached to his name. For Charles, invoking the old clause was about restoration, ensuring that the crown, not commerce, defined who could carry its titles. He believed he was protecting the monarchy's soul. Harry believed his father was erasing his existence. And in the middle of that storm stood James Alexander Philip, young, silent, and unaware that his name was now being whispered in legal documents, interviews, and editorials across Britain. But here's where it gets darker. Sources close to the royal legal team claim that when they re-examined the 2018 letters patent, they noticed something subtle: a missing cross-reference to the 1801 clause. In royal documents, omissions are rare and almost never accidental. That missing reference meant the Queen's decree might not have nullified the old clause after all. In other words, the king could still legally use it. Imagine realizing that a document written more than 200 years ago could be used to rewrite the future of a prince. That's exactly what the king's advisors told him. And for Charles, that realization wasn't just empowering, it was sobering. Because now, The decision rested on him alone. He could stay silent and let the discovery fade into obscurity, or he could act, fully aware that history would judge him either as a defender of tradition or as a father who cast out his son. Inside the palace, aides say he spent days reading old correspondence, letters from his mother, notes from Prince Philip, transcripts of past coronation oaths. Each one reminded him that being king means carrying a burden few can comprehend, the duty to protect something larger than yourself, even when it costs you everything personal. And that's why, according to insiders, the king finally made up his mind. But before the public could learn his next move, he called a meeting, one that would go down in royal history. Balmoral Castle, a place steeped in family memory and quiet confrontation. Every key royal, William, Edward, Anne, and Camilla, would be there. And during that meeting, for the first time, the king would speak the name written in that ancient clause, the name that could replace Harry's. James Alexander Philip. The Balmoral meeting was still echoing through the corridors of power when news reached California. King Charles had gathered his inner circle, invoked the old royal clause, and spoken a name that shattered the silence, James Alexander Philip. But thousands of miles away, as dusk fell over Montecito, that revelation landed like a thunderbolt. Harry was in the garden, phone pressed to his ear, pacing. The ocean breeze couldn't cool the heat rising in his chest. He had seen headlines before, scandal after scandal, but this one? This was different. This wasn't gossip. This was identity. This was his name, his title, his legacy being dangled like a prize over someone else's head. James? He's just a kid, he muttered, disbelief melting into anger. They're not serious. They can't be. But deep down, he knew the monarchy never acted without purpose. Every move was calculated. Every word weighed. And his father's warning, that chilling line, titles may not be used as instruments of profit or misrepresentation, was no idle remark. It was a signal, a threat delivered under the guise of royal decorum. That night, Harry didn't sleep. Meghan didn't either. She sat by the fireplace, scrolling through messages from aides, PR advisors, and friends. Her expression hardened with every update. "They're trying to erase us," she said quietly, piece by piece. Harry didn't answer. He was still staring out the window, jaw tight. In his mind, he replayed every moment he had defended his choices, the interviews, the documentaries, the book. The words he thought had freed him were now chains binding him to an image he could no longer escape. How do you fight an institution that owns your very name? By sunrise, his decision was made. He would fight. The first step wasn't legal. It was psychological. Harry understood the media. He knew perception was power. And if the monarchy was waging a war of image, he would fight back on the same battlefield. Within 48 hours, a familiar pattern emerged. Anonymous sources began appearing in major American outlets. Close friends of the Duke spoke of betrayal. Insiders hinted at legal overreach. A single phrase appeared across multiple headlines. Harry blindsided again. But this time, Harry himself took control of the narrative. He appeared at a charity gala in Los Angeles, his first public outing since the king's address. Cameras flashed. The audience fell silent when he took the stage. No introduction. No royal fanfare. Just Harry, in a black suit, eyes dark and defiant. "I've spent my life trying to serve in the only way I knew how," he said. "Through honesty. Through compassion. Through truth. Some people confuse truth with disloyalty. I call it courage." The crowd applauded, but he wasn't finished. Titles don't define integrity. People do. And I'll continue to stand for what's right, regardless of who tries to silence me. That last line wasn't subtle. It was a dart aimed straight at Buckingham Palace. The speech went viral. Clips flooded social media. Supporters called it his freedom statement. Critics called it reckless. But one thing was certain, Harry wasn't backing down. The next morning, palace aides briefed the king. Charles listened in silence, his face unreadable. When the video ended, he set the tablet down, rubbed his temple, and said softly, "He's forcing my hand." Back in Montecito, Meghan was strategizing. She had always been the tactician, the one who turned crisis into opportunity. "We need to get ahead of them," she said, sliding her laptop across the table. "Let's tell our story before they twist it." Harry hesitated. "You mean another interview?" "Not an interview," she replied. "A documentary. About legacy. About truth." Let them see what this really means to us. It was bold, risky, but Meghan understood something crucial. Control the narrative, and you control the history. So the cameras came out again. Quietly, discreetly. A Netflix crew was spotted near their estate, though at first, no one connected the dots. The working title, insiders claim, was Inherited Burdens, a documentary about identity, family, and duty, but everyone knew what it was really about. Meanwhile, the British tabloids went into overdrive. Palace furious as Harry defies King's warning. Duke of Sussex launches new media project amid title scandal. Every paper, every broadcast dissected Harry's every move. Inside Buckingham Palace, advisors were losing patience. He's exploiting it, one aide told a reporter. He's turning royal heritage into a personal brand. But here's where things took a shocking twist. While Harry was fighting to defend his title publicly, royal lawyers were finalizing the legal process privately. The document found in the archives had been authenticated, and the king was ready to act. Harry had no idea. Then came the leak. A British journalist published an exposé detailing the reversion clause, complete with quotes from unnamed palace insiders confirming that King Charles was considering formal steps to reclaim the Sussex title. The story spread like wildfire. Harry's team went into crisis mode. Meghan reportedly stormed into the kitchen, shouting, "They're trying to humiliate us again, in front of the world." Harry tried to call his father. No answer. He left a voicemail. "This isn't right, and you know it. Don't do this." But the silence from London was deafening. A week later, another development, a letter, hand-delivered, marked private and confidential, bearing the royal seal. Inside, a single page. No pleasantries, just a declaration written in the king's formal hand. Should continued public use of the title Duke of Sussex persist in contradiction to royal duty, steps shall be taken under the authority of the Crown to restore it to its lawful standing. It was a warning disguised as diplomacy. Harry's hands shook as he read it. "Lawful standing," he muttered. "He's already decided." The next morning, Meghan called her lawyer. "Prepare a response," she said. "If they want a war, they'll get one." But deep inside, Harry wasn't sure. He wasn't just fighting his father anymore. He was fighting the entire legacy of monarchy, and maybe even himself. Because every time he spoke out, every time he pushed back, the world saw not a victim of royal control, but a prince unable to let go of the title he claimed not to need. Still, he pressed on. Days later, during a podcast interview meant to promote one of his charities, he made another bold remark. "You can take the title away from me on paper, but you can't take away who I am." It was raw, emotional, defiant. But to the palace, it sounded like open rebellion. The king's aides urged him to move forward with the next phase, a formal reversion review. Charles hesitated. The pain of stripping his own son's title weighed heavily on him. Yet, the pressure from within the institution was unrelenting. The monarchy, they said, must remain above reproach. And while this storm raged, one small but crucial detail slipped under the radar. A photograph appeared online, blurry, seemingly insignificant. It showed James Alexander Philip leaving Windsor Chapel with his father, Prince Edward. In his hand, folded discreetly, was a letter bearing the royal seal. No one outside the palace knew what it said, but those who did claimed it was the beginning of the transfer, the preparation of a symbolic announcement that would confirm James as the rightful Duke of Sussex. Back in California, Harry saw the photo. His stomach dropped. "He's grooming him for it," he whispered. "He's really doing it." For a long time, he didn't move. The anger drained from his face, replaced by something colder, realization. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about replacement. The king was not just taking something from him. He was giving it to someone else. That night, as the house grew silent, Harry sat at his desk, staring at the letter from his father. He could still remember the moment Queen Elizabeth placed the sash across his chest, smiling, proud. He could still hear the crowd cheering outside St. George's Chapel. And now, that memory felt like a ghost. He opened his laptop, drafted a letter, and began to type. Not to the king, not to his lawyers, but to the people. Titles don't define who I am. But the attempt to take one away tells you everything about who they are. The statement went viral before sunrise. But its impact reached further than Harry ever imagined. Because across the ocean, inside Buckingham Palace, the king's private secretary entered the royal study, letter in hand, and said quietly, "Your Majesty, he's issued a public response." The king looked up, his face ashen. "So be it," he said. "Then he has made his choice." But what happened next? In the quiet of Balmoral, where the king gathered his family again to decide the title's fate, would push this crisis beyond politics. Because this time, Prince Edward would speak. And what he said next would change everything. The Scottish air was heavy that morning, dense with fog that rolled like a shroud across the Balmoral grounds. It was early, too early for ceremony. Yet inside the castle, the atmosphere pulsed with tension. This wasn't a casual gathering. It was a royal reckoning. For generations, Balmoral had been a sanctuary, the place where the royal family came to escape scrutiny. But today, it felt like a courtroom. The long dining hall had been converted into a conference chamber, its antique tapestries hanging like silent witnesses. King Charles sat at the head of the table, not as a father, but as a monarch. Before him lay a single folder marked with the royal seal. Inside, the reversion clause, the legal interpretations, and the draft decree that could erase Prince Harry's title forever. The clock struck 10. The doors opened. One by one, they entered. Prince William, composed, deliberate, masking his own storm behind calm eyes. Princess and stoic, arms folded, ready to speak her mind as she always did. Prince Edward, quiet, almost hesitant, his young son James standing just outside, waiting with a private secretary. And then Queen Camilla, poised, watchful, saying little but reading everything. Charles took a breath. "Thank you for coming," he began, voice steady but strained. "We must address what has become a crisis of identity and duty." No one spoke. He continued. "The discovery in the archives confirms what few of us ever imagined. The Sussex title was created with conditions that have, I believe, been compromised." He paused, letting the words hang. "And I must act, not out of anger, but necessity." William leaned forward slightly. "Father," he said carefully, "before you proceed, may I ask, is this about protecting the monarchy or punishing Harry?" Charles met his gaze. "The two are no longer separate," and scoffed softly. "You know how this will look. The public won't see nuance. They'll see a king stripping his son." "I'm aware," Charles replied. "But if I fail to act, then the monarchy becomes a brand, not a bond. And I will not let that happen." There was a long silence. The fire crackled faintly in the hearth. Then, from the far end of the table, Prince Edward spoke for the first time. "Your Majesty," he began formally, though his voice trembled just slightly. "May I ask, what happens if you do invoke the clause? What does it mean for the future?" Charles opened the folder. Inside was a second document, a prepared draft titled Reassignment of the Dukedom of Sussex. His hand lingered over it. "It means," he said quietly, "that the title reverts to the crown. And from there, it may be reassigned." Edward hesitated. "And you intend to assign it?" The king nodded. To James. The room froze, and his eyes widened. "You can't be serious." William's chair creaked as he sat back, visibly processing the words. "You're saying you'll give my cousin Harry's title? Publicly?" Charles nodded again, slower this time. "James embodies the qualities this title once stood for: humility, discretion, loyalty. He represents the renewal that this institution desperately needs." The silence was so complete that even the ticking of the clock felt deafening. And leaned forward. "He's a boy, Charles. Barely 18. Do you know what this would do to him?" To Harry. "I do," the king said. "But this isn't about emotion. It's about order. The monarchy cannot survive sentiment." William exhaled sharply. "And yet it's sentiment that's tearing it apart." Charles looked at him. "You think I don't know that?" His voice cracked, just enough to reveal the man beneath the crown. "Do you think this is easy? Watching my own son dismantle everything his grandmother built? Turning his title into a marketing tool? I warned him, William. I gave him every chance to stop. He didn't listen," and folded her arms. "And you believe taking his title will make him listen now?" "No," Charles said flatly. "It will make him irrelevant." Camilla spoke for the first time, her tone soft but cutting. "He won't go quietly." Charles turned toward her. "He already declared war. I'm simply ending it." A heavy silence fell again. The king's words echoed against the ancient stone walls, ending it. Then Edward stood, slowly, carefully. "Your Majesty," he said, more firmly this time, "I cannot accept what you propose." The king frowned. "You cannot accept?" Edward's voice grew steadier. James does not want this. He never did. He knows what that title means and what it would cost. He doesn't have a choice, Charles replied. He is royal. We serve the crown, not ourselves. With respect, Edward said, his tone sharpening. Service doesn't mean silence. You're asking him to wear a name that's still bleeding. A title that divides, not unites. William shifted, eyes flicking between his uncle and father, and sat back, watching, almost impressed. Charles's expression hardened. Edward, you are loyal. But you forget, this is not a debate. The decision is mine. And the consequence will be yours, Edward said quietly. You think you're protecting the monarchy, but you're hollowing it out. Every time you replace love with law, you lose another piece of it. The king didn't answer. His fingers tightened around the pen resting beside the decree, and finally broke the silence. He's right, Charles. There's still time to de-escalate. Issue a statement clarifying your intent, not stripping the title. Let the public think you're mediating, not punishing. But Charles shook his head. Mediation has failed. He rejected every overture. He chose defiance. Camilla leaned forward slightly. And if Harry reacts badly, if he speaks again? Then so be it, the king said, voice low. He's already crossed the line. Let him scream into the void. The crown will remain silent, as it always has. Outside, the wind howled against the glass panes, rattling them like restless spirits. William glanced toward his father's folder, the royal seal glinting in the firelight. If you do this, he said softly, you'll lose him forever. Charles's eyes flicked up, and for a brief moment, the mask slipped. The pain there was unmistakable. I already have, he said. Then came a knock at the door. The chamberlain entered, bowing slightly. Your Majesty, the young Lord James awaits. Edward's face tensed. He doesn't need to be part of this. But the king gestured. Let him in. The doors opened. James stepped inside, tall, composed, a faint uncertainty in his eyes. He bowed respectfully. Your Majesty. Charles studied him. Do you understand why you're here? James hesitated. Father explained some of it. But I don't wish to take anything that belongs to another. The words cut deeper than anyone expected. And looked down. William's brow furrowed. Charles's voice softened, almost paternal. Sometimes, duty isn't about wanting James. It's about accepting what history asks of you. James nodded slowly. If that's what the crown requires, I'll serve. But not at the cost of family. The room went still again. Edward placed a hand on his son's shoulder, proud yet protective. You've said enough. Charles exhaled, visibly torn. He glanced once more at the document before him. The decree that could end one chapter and begin another. His pen hovered. Then, softly, William spoke again. If you sign that, it's forever. The king didn't move. So is duty, he murmured. And then, without ceremony, he lowered the pen and pressed it to paper. The scratching of the ink seemed to echo endlessly. When he finished, he set the pen down and whispered, It's done. No one applauded. No one moved. And rose first. Then may God forgive us all, she said, before walking out. Edward followed, silent. James lingered, looking at the document that now bore his name and implication, not yet public, but inevitable. He turned to the king and said quietly, I wish it didn't have to be this way. Charles looked up, eyes heavy with something between regret and resolve. So do I. As James left, the king turned toward the window. Outside, the fog had begun to lift, revealing the Scottish Highlands, vast, endless, indifferent. Camilla stood behind him. What will you tell the press? Nothing, he said. The act will speak for itself. But even as he spoke, the news had already begun to leak. A courier leaving Balmoral had been seen carrying sealed envelopes, one bound for Buckingham Palace, another for the Royal Herald's office. Within hours, the world would know. And across the ocean,